Hey everyone, Ludwig here. When Clint Eastwood strolled into one of LA's most high-end restaurants dressed casually in a simple polo shirt and slacks, no one recognized the iconic actor and director. That's when an overconfident waitress made the biggest mistake of her career. She tried to humiliate and kick out a man she assumed was just an ordinary older customer. What she had no idea about was this. Clint didn't just have a reservation. He actually owned the entire restaurant. What happened next became the stuff of Hollywood legend. In true Clint Eastwood fashion, he transformed this moment into an unforgettable lesson about respect, a lesson that restaurant would never forget. It was a regular Friday evening at the Grand Oak, a newly renovated dining spot buzzing with LA's elite. Young tech moguls in sleek designer suits, social media influencers snapping photos of their gold leaf desserts, and old money families enjoying their weekly traditions filled the space. Among them sat a man wearing nothing more than a simple gray polo shirt and casual slacks, quietly sipping whiskey at his usual corner table. Most of the seasoned staff recognized him right away. How could they not? 6 months earlier, Clint Eastwood had quietly purchased the Grand Oak. He'd given the staff one key directive: treat him just like any other customer during his occasional visits to check on quality. Clint firmly believed that the true essence of a great restaurant lay in how it treated its everyday patrons, not just its celebrities. But Rachel, the restaurant's newest waitress, was completely unaware of this. Fresh out of a prestigious hospitality school and trying to grow her own food influencer profile, Rachel spent her shift alternating between fawning over Instagram personalities and casting judgmental looks at the casually dressed man in her section. Thomas, the seasoned manager, watched her nervously from across the room. He'd seen that judgmental look in Rachel's eyes before. Just last week, she'd aimed it at a retired surgeon who had dared to wear loafers instead of formal shoes. But tonight was different. Tonight, her misjudgment would lead to consequences she couldn't begin to imagine. As Rachel's clicking heels approached Clint's table, Thomas held his breath, and the veteran staff exchanged uneasy glances. They all sensed the calm before the storm. Meanwhile, the quiet man in the polo shirt remained composed, taking another sip of whiskey, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Rachel stopped at Clint's table, her iPhone subtly visible in her apron pocket, her smile practiced but insincere. "Sir, I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that house whiskey for quite some time now," she said, her tone dripping with subtle condescension. Clint looked up, meeting her gaze with the same calm and steady demeanor that had won him countless battles with Hollywood executives over the years. "It's a good whiskey," he replied simply. "Perhaps," Rachel continued, her voice heavy with feigned concern, "you'd feel more comfortable at the bar. We're expecting several reserved parties soon, and this table," she gestured toward the immaculate white tablecloth, "is typically for our dining guests." Nearby, a young busboy named Miguel, who had immigrated from Mexico 2 years ago and worked tirelessly to support his family, overheard their exchange while clearing plates from another table. Miguel knew exactly who the man in the polo shirt was. He'd grown up watching Clint Eastwood films with his father. His grip tightened on the bus tub as he fought the urge to speak up. Slightly, Rachel glanced at her watch before shifting her gaze to a group of young tech executives waiting at the host stand. "Sir," she began, her tone clipped, "our executive chef crafts a very exclusive menu. The prices," she paused deliberately, her eyes flicking to his simple attire, "reflect the caliber of this establishment." At a nearby table, an older couple who had been regulars for over 2 decades shifted uneasily. The husband looked like he was about to speak up, but his wife gently touched his arm, understanding the expression in Clint's eyes. The same piercing look that had preceded some of cinema's most unforgettable moments. "I'm well aware of the prices," Clint replied evenly, his voice carrying the gravelly tone that had captivated audiences for years. "And of the chef's work." Rachel's smile faltered completely. Frustration creeping into her movements, she pulled out her notepad with sharp, irritated gestures. "Well then, sir, shall I explain the menu slowly, perhaps?" Her final words carried an unmistakable jab at his age. Nearby, Miguel, who had been watching the exchange unfold, finally couldn't hold back. Stepping forward, he said quietly but firmly, "Miss Rachel, maybe I should get Thomas." "Stay out of this," Rachel snapped, her tone as sharp as her words. "Go bus tables, that's your job." Clint, who had observed Miguel's brave attempt with quiet interest, turned his focus back to Rachel. "Now, sir," Rachel continued, her voice rising enough to catch the attention of nearby tables, one last time. "This isn't some roadside diner. This is the Grand Oak. Perhaps back in your day, things were different, but here, we have standards." Clint set his whiskey glass down, the motion slow and deliberate. Though subtle, it commanded more attention than Rachel's growing agitation. A few older patrons recognized the gesture. An echo of the poised, calm Clint had displayed in some of his most iconic film roles. "In my day," he repeated softly, one eyebrow arching slightly. "Yes," Rachel pressed on, her disdain bubbling over. "Your day, when people thought they could just walk into any establishment, dress however they pleased, order the cheapest drink, and take up space meant for real customers." Now fully committed to her tirade, Rachel's bottled-up irritation with unfashionable patrons spilled out unchecked. Times have changed. This is a luxury restaurant for people who understand and appreciate modern sophistication. Miguel, frozen in place, had abandoned any pretense of clearing tables, his eyes wide as the scene unraveled. Behind him, Thomas was quickly approaching, his face pale as he realized just how badly the situation had escalated. "Modern sophistication," Clint repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the phrase. "And what exactly does that mean to you, Rachel?" Hearing her name startled her, though she quickly assumed he'd overheard another server use it. Regaining her composure, she declared, "It means understanding that not every place is for everyone. Our clientele values a certain ambience." She gestured toward a group of young entrepreneurs taking selfies with their extravagant gold leaf desserts. "They get it. They respect what the Grand Oak represents. They're not here pretending to be something they're not." The irony of her words hung in the air. Several veteran servers exchanged knowing glances. Thomas, now just steps away, looked as though he might intervene, his expression tense. "Pretending," Clint mused, that familiar half-smile curling at the edges of his lips. Interesting choice of words. Rachel, her patience finally snapping, cut him off. "Listen," she said sharply, her voice tinged with exasperation. "I've tried to be polite, but it's clear you don't belong here. This isn't some set from one of those old cowboy movies. This is a prestigious establishment, and I won't let you ruin the experience for our real guests." Clint's expression remained calm as he reached into his pocket, retrieved his phone, and made a single call. "Jerry, can you bring me the ownership papers?" "Yes, right now, and the renovation plans we discussed last week." He set the phone down gently, then turned his attention back to Rachel, who was beginning to realize that something was terribly, terribly wrong. "You see, Rachel," Clint began in that same steady voice, "I've been coming here every Friday for the past 6 months, sitting at this same table and ordering the same whiskey. Want to know why?" Rachel's face began to lose its color as the implications of his words started to sink in. "Because 6 months ago," Clint continued, his tone unwavering, "I bought this restaurant. Not for prestige, not for what you call modern luxury, but because for 50 years, the Grand Oak stood for something real. It was a place where genuine hospitality meant treating every guest with respect, no matter what they wore or how many followers they had. The room was silent, so silent that the drop of a napkin would have been deafening. Moments later, Jerry, the restaurant's longtime accountant, arrived, carrying a leather portfolio. He nodded respectfully to Clint, handed over the documents, and stepped back, barely hiding a knowing smile. Rachel stood frozen, her order pad dangling uselessly in her hand. The reality of her situation was sinking in, wave after wave, each realization worse than the last. She hadn't just insulted a customer, she had insulted Clint Eastwood. And not only that, but she'd insulted her own boss. A boss who wasn't just any ordinary employer, but a living legend who had built his career portraying characters who stood firmly against the very kind of arrogance she had just displayed. "Miss," Clint said, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 6 decades of commanding respect on and off the screen, "let me tell you a story about this place." He gestured around the dining room. 50 years ago, I came here for the first time. I wasn't famous yet, not anyone really. I wore a shirt a lot like this one. But the owner, Old Man Thompson, treated me like I was the most important guest he'd ever had. Not because of who I was, but because that's how he treated everyone. He paused, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. When his son decided to sell this place 6 months ago, I bought it for one reason, to preserve that spirit. Real class isn't about designer labels or social media followers. It's about dignity, respect, and treating everyone as though they matter. Miguel, still standing nearby, straightened up a little taller. The older couple at the next table nodded in agreement, while even some of the young influencers had lowered their phones, captivated by the moment. "So," Clint said, fixing Rachel with his legendary steady gaze, "the question isn't whether I belong here. The question is whether you understand what this place really stands for." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as the weight of reality crushed her carefully constructed view of the world. But what happened next surprised everyone, even herself. "I could fire you right now," Clint said, his voice gentler now, "but that's not what this place is about. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice." He gestured toward Miguel, who stepped forward nervously. "This young man tried to warn you," Clint said. "He recognized me, not because of social media, but because he watched my films with his father. He understands something you didn't. Respect isn't about appearances." Turning to Miguel, Clint spoke with quiet authority. "Son, how would you like to start training as a waiter? We could use more people who understand what real service means." Miguel's eyes widened with shock and gratitude. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As for you, Rachel," Clint continued, turning back to her, "your choice is simple. You can walk out that door and find another job at a place more focused on modern luxury. Or you can stay, learn from Miguel and our veteran staff, and understand what real hospitality is all about. Your call." Rachel wiped her eyes and looked around at the dignified faces of the staff who had been there far longer than her. I'd like to stay and learn, sir. If you'll let me." "Good choice," Clint said with a nod, finishing his whiskey. "Thomas, put Miguel in charge of her retraining." As the tension in the room dissolved, the older couple at the next table began clapping. Gradually, others joined in, not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the lesson they had just witnessed. A powerful reminder that true class isn't about clothes or status. It's about how we treat each other. To this day, the Grand Oak remains one of LA's finest restaurants, not for its luxury, but for its heart. And if you stop by on a Friday evening, you might just see a man in a simple polo shirt sitting at his favorite corner table, quietly ensuring that the old values of respect and dignity live on.